Good morning, sweet friends. It is Friday, March 20th, and we are going to be reading a devotional. I got these new devotionals from Turning Point, and it's Freely Give, and we're also going to be talking about forgiveness. And be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ forgave you. Ephesians 4:32. When Jesus sent his 12 disciples out to minister to the needy in his name, he gave them power to heal the sick and drive out demons, even raise the dead. And that comes from Matthew 10, verse 1 through 15, if you would like to look that up. And he spoke a principle that infuses all the Christian life. Freely you have received, freely give. So because we have been freely forgiven by Jesus Christ, he died on the cross for us, we are to forgive others as he forgave us. We're supposed to be a representative of Christ when we're Christians, so that's what he's calling us to do. In other words, the disciples had no power of their own to restore the afflicted. Jesus gave them power. Since they had freely received power and authority, they were to freely use that power to help others. They were to do what Jesus would have done if he had been there. The principle of freely receiving and freely giving applies to a challenging part of life, the challenge of forgiveness. So that's something as Christians we are called to do, but it's something that is extremely difficult. When somebody wrongs us, right, the human mind, our first instinct is to try to get even or to hold a grudge. But what Christ calls us to do is to forgive. The Apostle Paul wrote about forgiveness. We are to forgive others in the same way God has forgiven us. Freely we have received forgiveness, so freely we are to give forgiveness. Not to give forgiveness is to imprison ourselves behind the bars of resentment, anger, and vengeance. And if you've been in church for any amount of time, you've probably heard the saying that forgiving somebody is, not forgiving somebody is like drinking poison and expecting them to die. So basically, we're punishing ourselves when we're choosing not to forgive. When we forgive, it releases us from bondage as much as the other person. So if we're hanging on to that, we're really hurting ourselves. It's basically a hardened heart posture at that point. Why would anyone want to do that? The only way to live free is to receive God's forgiveness and then freely give it to others. Turning Point, forgiven us to be set loose from sins. And this comes from G. Campbell Morgan. And then it's funny because I looked this up again, Ephesians 4:32, without realizing it was up here. So I was going to read it in my Bible, but I think it's pretty similar, if not the same, in my Bible.